Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear us, as this is our first live stream. So I am Daniel, and this is Adam. We are the founders of Errant. And today we'll go through fundamentals of Errant biomes and Errant landscape. So we'll start with a few slides to talk about the most important parts of our plugins. So the first thing is, of course, that Errant Worlds is made of 3 plugins. The first one is Landscape, which is for sculpting the landscape and painting weight maps. The second one is Biomes, which is usually used for nature and placing foliage, but can be also used for gameplay and placing lights, affixes, sounds. And the first one is Paths, which can be used for all types of spline-based objects. So roads, rivers, walls, electrical cables, pipelines, and so on. And when working on Errant Worlds, we have a few key things that we focus on. And the first one is performance and scalability, meaning that we want our tools to work well when you go from a small level up to huge levels, in things like hundreds of square kilometers, and we don't want the performance to degrade when you go to these large levels. Also, levels where you have millions of objects, so memory intense. The second thing is balance between automation and control. So despite the fact that our tools use procedural generation, we don't want artists to feel like they lose any control compared to placing things by hand. The third thing is efficient team cooperation. This means that we don't want our tools to only work for indie developers or single devs. We want them to work for large teams where multiple people are working on the same map at the same time, and they need to be able to work in parallel. So some people are working on one part of the map, and then like a few other teams are doing different changes on the map at the same time. And it also comes down to having enough granularity in our assets so that if you want to change one aspect of the generation, you don't check out a file that controls everything, so that other people could change other aspects of the generation at the same time. Another point is programmability. And this comes from our conclusion early in the development that there is never enough sliders and properties that we can provide, because there will always be some unique new use of our tools. And instead of cluttering UI with even more options, we chose the path of programmability, where in different stages of the generation, we give you these small snippets of programmable graphs that everyone can handle, because it's very isolated and small, and it gives you the freedom that you can create whatever you want. The next point is we wanted our plugins to be complete solution. So this is in contrast to frameworks, where in the framework you are given the building blocks and you are expected to build your own solution with these building blocks, and you need to usually program your solution on top of that. That's typically pretty difficult and time consuming. We went a different path. We want to give you a solution that you can use without extra work and create levels from scratch up to the production level and levels that you can put in the final game. And the last thing is integration into the ecosystem, meaning that we didn't want to create our own small ecosystem in Unreal. We wanted to work well with the entire ecosystem, so work well with all the tools in Unreal. And that sometimes comes with extra work, such as dealing with legacy systems, but we believe this is the only way, the only good way forward, because we don't have to manage, we don't have to repeat the existing tools and recreate them. And the first plugin we'll show today is Errant Landscape. It works with the standard landscape, so this follows the rules we set before, that we want to work with existing systems. And you can place these brushes with mountains and scale them, rotate them, and move them in the map. And the main thing about this plugin is how optimized it is. When you move these plugins, we only update the area that is covered by the brush, so the overall size of the map doesn't really matter. And we also postpone certain updates, such as collision updates, so that you get the best real-time editing performance. And you can have thousands of these brushes in your map and it will work fine. Another thing is that the plugin supports weight map painting. So you can import a splat map, let's say made in Gaia, add it to a brush, and you could, for example, generate snow coverage based on that. The next thing is that multiple artists need to be able to concurrently edit the landscape. This is what we talked about before, that when you move a brush on the map, it only modifies the landscape proxies which are underneath. It doesn't touch the rest of the landscape, so that multiple people may be shaping the landscape in different parts of the map at the same time. And the last thing is that it integrates well with Errant biomes. It can communicate with the biomes by using biome masks. And these masks are similar to weight maps, but they're more lightweight in terms of memory. So they are preferred over weight maps. And let's switch to Unreal.
Yeah, now the proper session begins.
Yes, we will start from scratch, from a completely new level. And we'll use world partition. So let's create landscape.
Yeah, those days there's no reason to ever use level without world partition. Who wants to create small levels, really?
Yes, that's true. And I guess 2x2. We'll create an 8x8 kilometer landscape, and we'll use the landscape material that comes with our plugin. When you have the download page, you can find it in like a section, I think, at the top of the page, and you can download it and use it freely in your projects. And I think the settings are fine.
Yeah, that's fine. Now we'll have to wait a moment. So for people that maybe didn't use our plugins before, but maybe played around with landmass or things like this, you probably realize how in those tools working on 8x8 kilometers landscape can be kind of painful, especially because those other tools usually update the whole landscape if they don't need to. So on the video that Daniel had before on slides, you could have seen the extents of the brushes. So those orange outlines, those are places that will be updated when you modify the brush. Nothing else will get modified. So as long as your brushes aren't too big, it doesn't really matter how many you have of them on the level. They only update the area underneath them. So no matter if you have 8x8 kilometers or just 1x1 kilometer level, it will work just as well when you move, kilometer by kilometer brush.
Okay, so just added ultra dynamic sky to bring some lightning to the level, and yeah, it's a great plugin, so why not?
Yeah.
And we'll go.
Why don't we see? Oh yeah, because we don't have anything painted.
Yes, so these are the weight maps that come in with the material or are part of the material. So we need to configure them. These assets also come with it, and
yeah, you always need to set weight map infos for weight maps, say how they should behave, to set the physical properties of those weight maps, as well as definition for how they should blend with other weight maps. Yeah, if they are not, if you don't have any layer infos created already, you can just press the plus button on the right and choose the weight blended version for those.
Yes, and right now we have one layer with the default layer in here called layer, but we will use a separate layer for Errant landscape. So we'll create it with this button here.
Yeah, what this button does is basically just creates another layer on your base landscape, and also creates a layer, errant layer, like actor that communicates to which layer in the original landscape do you want errant landscape to write to, basically.
And
yeah, as you can see, the layer has been created and it's already locked, just so you don't start drawing on it by accident.
yes, and one important bit is that Unreal doesn't really deal well when you have weight maps painted on multiple layers. You don't get this normalization that normally happens. So what we will start with is to clear that grass weight map that was filled by default in the normal layer. So we end up with the black landscape, and just to fill it with something, we will fill it in the Errant landscape layer. Of course, Errant landscape will override that once we start placing brushes.
Yeah, we just filled it just so we don't have a black void underneath. But to expand of what we said currently, the weight blended weight maps work in a way that they need to sum up to 1. So in the material, you don't need to worry about blending them. You know that that the maximal value for all the weight maps added together is 1. The problem is Unreal doesn't handle well weight blending if you have multiple layers at the same time. So we'll just let Errant Landscape do all the weight blending for us. So we just use that for weight blending. Yeah.
And one other thing is that if you want to create the landscape which is larger than 8 by 8 kilometers, we have a tool for that, because the built-in tool doesn't allow you to do that. And we have this tool where you have create new landscape, and you can type any number of components and create, any size of the landscape.
Yeah, after some of our clients learned that even 8 by 8 kilometers works just fine, and going 16 by 16 is also fine. They were disappointed that the widget for creating landscapes in Unreal doesn't allow you to go further. So we just created a version of that allows you to go however much you want, really, however big you want.
And now I went into the create mode in Errant landscape. We can select one of these brushes. You can download them as like additional content also from the download license page. And and they're already configured. If you look at how they look, they are the height map, a bunch of splat maps, and the blueprint with the brush, which is already configured.
One thing that maybe you should mention is how to install the stamp library. We provide it as a separate package, as it's too big to include it with the plugin. You don't want to download like 30 gigs of textures every time you update the plugin, so we provide it separately. But Unreal works. Unreal assets are referenced by the path, so the path cannot change at all. So the folder needs to be extracted exactly as we are saying in documentation. So in your content directory in your project, you should have extracted Errant Landscape Stamp Library directory and nothing in it. So it's not Errant Landscape Stamp Library and Errant Landscape Stamp Library inside that directory. Inside that directory, there should be already the brushes.
Yes.
So that is kind of important. Otherwise, you'll have some problems placing the brushes in the end.
We really need to add an installer for that, because there is not a single day where someone doesn't come to report that problem.
Yes.
That's why we're talking about it. Okay, let's place some brushes in the level. So here's the crater. Let's add something else.
Yeah, and really this crater was kilometer by kilometer, if not more. And it's, you just place it and it works. You don't need to import something waiting for 10 minutes for it to import. Like this, you place like 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers stamp.
Yes, this brush is huge.
You didn't even feel it, yeah.
Let's place something else as well. Like I like this mountain range, but maybe this is too big for now. Mountain valley, maybe. Okay, these are like brushes that are like larger, that you're probably meant to put over the large part of your landscape. But we will go, for now, we'll go a few smaller ones just to... The Icelandic was another one.
Łukasz is asking if he has already landscape created in Unreal Editor. Is it too late to start using Errant landscape? Does he need to import something? But no, it will work just fine as we are working with the base landscape itself. So we just write into another layer into the landscape as we've shown. We just created another layer and we are working on it. So if you have already created your landscape manually or imported it from some packages, you can always just add Errant landscape on top of it. And Daniel, I think you have visualization for something enabled. That's why we see this black outline. For now, just disable it. You have biome.
Yeah, I was wondering what's the weird weather on the map? Like, where does it come from?
Yeah, we'll get to visualizing later.
Okay, so we placed 2 brushes. We placed 2 more just to, let's say, Mountain Pass. I don't really know them by memory. Oop.
Yeah, then maybe I'll mention some other things about the brushes. You might notice in the corner that the brushes are really components. They are not actors as in other systems. That allows you to compose them better. You can have multiple stamps, multiple brushes. They could be stamps, but could be other things inside single actor. So you can create a mountain range just by combining multiple mountains to a single actor. Then you can just save it as a blueprint and just place it on the level whenever you need it. You can also combine it with your gameplay logic. So you could have, for example, some house that you know needs to paint some weight maps around it and adjust the landscape a bit. You could have a stamp just inside this actor. So when you move the house around the level, it will adjust the landscape automatically. Killer Hacking also is asking, is runtime deformation far off? We are working on it. We'll be posting updates on our Discord.
I also want to place one huge brush. I think it's called Mountain Range. Yes, because I really like this brush. So we will make it cover the entire landscape. And the brush is 4x4. So we will make it 8x500.
Yeah, and again, we are covering 8x8 kilometers of landscape in real time in the editor, moving this brush, and you don't get much problems with that. I'll be like not covering small things that we can see on the screen. For example, you can see those little small brush icons. Those aren't something that's hard-coded. You can set your own sprites for your brushes. You can also use meshes. And in the upcoming update, you can also add text. They are very important when you get later in the production and you have like thousands of brushes on the level, because we found that that people working for plugins in the end end up with doing everything using brushes, because you can just move them around freely at any moment in the production. So it's always better to place even a simple brush than just paint something on the landscape. It's also usually more optimal anyway, performance-wise, for working with the landscape.
Yes, and also if you get blurry textures, it's worth noting that sometimes you need to increase the streaming pool. I think it was streaming pool.
Yeah, the default streaming pool size is, I think, 1 gigabyte, which is kind of small for working with 8x8 kilometers landscape loaded.
Yes, today it seems okay, but sometimes it can get blurry. Okay, so this is also a convenient way to import a height map into Unreal, because if you do it in the normal way, you need to match the exact pixel count and so on. Sometimes it's frustrating. Okay, but the landscape is like a bit flat. We can make it larger. So let's go to mountain range, and we can actually do it through Gizmo. We can increase the height by just pulling.
You're outside the
Oh
Errant
no,
landscape
I did
mode.
it again.
So yes, one thing that's kind of important, and the editor will scream at you in the moment, that we do a lot of optimizations to make landscape edits fast, but you need to have Errant landscape mode open. As you can see, when you're out, we need to do the slow way of updating everything, because we don't want you to, for example, forget to update collisions or things like this. So just be sure to always do edits with Run Landscape mode open. Don't do what just Daniel did.
Yes, I'm also doing something pretty extreme because we're modifying 64 square kilometers right now. Yeah, of course you don't do it normally. In your project.
Yeah, usually you should try to create many smaller brushes than having 8x8 kilometers brush modified at the same time.
Yes, and we also wanted to show you the artifact that you may come across. As you can see, the tops of these hills get clumped. And this is because we reach the maximum value that our landscape can store, the maximum height value. And in order to fix that, we could fix that by hand by increasing the landscape scale and then decreasing the size of the brushes. But we have a tool for that, which is change landscape max height. And we select the landscape, and let's use, say, 250 for the scale.
300 is usually good, but 250 would be fine as well, I think.
In general, the less the better. You get more precision the lower scale you use. Yes.
Yeah, so what this tool did, it was just changing the z-scale of the landscape, the scaling of the brushes proportionally. So they keep the same size while increasing the range of values allowed in the landscape. Yeah. The thing is that I think Daniel is also saving, because sometimes, when working on landscape, Unreal can store a lot of data for undoing changes and things like this, and this undo buffer can take a lot of memory. Sometimes just saving can flush this buffer, so you lose option of undoing your changes, but at least it works better in the editor.
When it comes to the artifacts that you see with the sky, I think it's because the sky is meant to render not on top of the landscape, but only underneath. And maybe that's when we rotate the landscape. Maybe that causes some artifacts, not sure.
I'm not sure about which artifacts you're even
sometimes
talking.
there is the sky is delayed, glitched.
Yeah, let's ignore it for now. Also, I see you're setting up the game mode just to run around it, but let's not spend too much time on it. Just loading 8x8 kilometers landscape into the game can sometimes take like a minute.
It's actually loaded. I just don't see the character.
No, you're in simulation. You're not in the game.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. Wait, did I switch the?
Yeah. Yes, you've switched to simulate. You need to select the viewport.
Okay. Don't know when I switched it. So, okay, the world partition doesn't show us the entire landscape. We are only seeing a small fragment, actually. But this is huge landscape.
In world settings, yeah.
So if you want to see
loading range in runtime
this one, let's add one more 0 maybe, or even 2.
We won't call landscape anyway, so whatever.
Yeah, so now you get the scale. This is humongous, really. And when you look afar, this is a huge landscape. And the fact that we can modify it with a single brush is quite insane. Okay, we need to show you one other thing, which is, priorities.
We have a lot of things to show, but maybe before we go into priority, I'll also explain why do we have a priority view. So usually with most of the tools, when you for working with landscape, you have a single actor that stores information about, for example, list of brushes. So if you're working here with landmass or water plugin, when you place any new brush on the level, it needs to add that actor, the list in the landscape actor. That means only a single person in a team can add brushes at the same time, as he'll need to check it out in the source control. To avoid that, none of those brushes registers to a single actor. They are all registered dynamically in editor. But that adds some other obstacles. For example, how do you order which brush is above or underneath another if you don't have a single list? Well, for that we go to old tried way of using priorities, just with translucence priority and so on. But then you have a problem. How do you even order things around without having to open each brush, like setting some random number, or like deciding at the beginning of the projects that those mountains will have a priority of 10,000 or those of 100 and so on. So for that, we just created this small priority window where we represent all your priorities as a simple list where you can drag and drop brushes just as if it were a list in a single actor. But all it does is changes the priority in relation to all the other brushes at the list. So there's just a small helper, but a very important one in organizing your work with brushes. So maybe Daniel show like blending mode of sub.
Yes, so we're in additive blending mode. So the creator, adds on top of whatever is there, but you don't always want that. Often you want to do the replace mode. So I just switched the replace mode, but as you can see, the behavior didn't change, and that's because the creator doesn't have higher priority. So we need to order our brushes like properly. And now if we give it a higher priority, as you can see, the creator actually now dominates that area, and we can move it. So that's important, and that's sometimes confusing. And as you can see, these numbers, they represent the priorities that you give to these brushes.
Yeah, a very small thing, but it makes you happy to see those numbers flying around the world.
And you can, of course, also invert these brushes. So by creating that very weird hill. And let's...
Yes, every canyon is secretly a very weird hill.
Or a cliff, yeah. Let's paint some weight maps, maybe. And I think we can do it over which, like rock crack, mountain.
It was a mountain range, I think. Yeah.
I can never tell which one is the large one.
I think it was range, not the pass. The pass is the smaller one.
Yes, but let's start with the smaller one for now.
Okay.
So here you have the settings for the height map, but you also have settings for the weight map. And visibility mask, which is transparency, and biomes mask. We will talk about biomes masks later. So for weight maps, let's set up, you can have different, basically here you use your splat maps or any kind of information, about the metadata of the landscape. And we will use something related to the height map. So a texture from the same folder. We can use the flow isn't really maybe deposit. So yes, apply it here, and we give it the name of the weight map. So let's say snow, and yeah, here it goes. So just based on that splat map, we just placed the snow weight map, and we can edit it.
And I'll also reiterate on the aspect we maybe went quickly through, that those weight maps are weight blended. With most of the other tools in Unreal, when using weight maps in them, like in landmass, for example, they use non-weight blended mode. So they don't have this they don't sum up to one, basically. So it's easier to work with with those weight maps in Errant landscape as they work basically like when you're painting. So when you're painting a forest, you remove all the other weight maps in the same place. You don't add forest on top of fields, and then you have like weird blending of textures underneath. Errant landscape properly blends all the weight maps for you. So this snow removes all the grass that we had there.
I will now paint weight maps from the largest brush that we have, the one that covers the entire map.
Oh no, autosave strikes again. Always at the worst moment.
Well, this one wasn't the worst yet.
No,
it could be much worse.
It can be worse. Yes, it's like the worst moment is when it's like something is barely working, almost at the verge of crashing, and then autosaves comes up, and it's like, oh, come on.
So yeah, we have a weight map called Forest Needles. So let's paint it.
Kiwi Hawk is asking, is that the place where we would use heat maps, for example, from World Creator? And yes, that's where you can use them. You can use them as weight maps or as biomes, depending on what you want to do with them. If you want a landscape material to use them to represent some different visuals, you usually want weight maps. But if you just want to pass some procedural information, some metadata to biomes, usually you would want to use biome masks, just so you don't have to use those weight maps in the material. If you just create a dummy weight map inside the landscape material to pass it to biomes, it will get optimized out quite quickly that material is not using this weight map, so the compiler will just throw it out. So you cannot, so you have to use all the weight maps in the material for them to exist, which means you cannot just have some metadata for biomes. So use biome masks for that. They were created exactly for this purpose.
Yeah, unfortunately, painting weight maps over such a large area consumes a lot of memory, and Unreal sometimes slows down. So I think I will reload the map so that we get more frames per second in the editing. But there was something else I wanted to show maybe before we do that, we have this fall off. Maybe we can actually show it on the... Okay, we can do it on this one.
Pavel is daring you to save now, but saving would be fine. Saving would even help, really.
I tried saving, but it didn't help. I wanted to show fall off because that's of course pretty important. So if you go to blend settings in the brush, you have this fall off property, and in this brush it isn't super visible because the brush itself is rounded. But you can use it to adjust, all kinds of brushes too.
Yeah, often if you import your height maps from other software, it will have like harsh edges on the side because it moves the landscape up all around the brush, and the texture is square. So you usually have a big square around the brush, and fall off is what helps you to blend that square with the rest of the map, basically. Yeah.
So I'll try to apply fall off to the entire map. Let's see how that goes. I have a bad habit of trying to break our tools every time.
Yeah, as we said, the biggest optimization that our tools are doing is modifying only what they need to. So working with smaller brushes allows you to work very smoothly. But if you make a 8 kilometers by 8 kilometers landscape, it needs to update whole 8 kilometers of landscape. If we do it very fast, it can take some time, especially as you have also weight maps on the same brush. So it needs to, update all the weight maps and height maps and so on. Usually try to work with smaller brushes.
Yeah, I will reload the level so with that we get the smoothness back. So we get a question about the spline mode in the brush.
Yeah, if we have some time later, we'll show it. But basically, you can modify the shape of the stamp brush with a spline.
I can also show you...
It basically does what it sounds like, really. changes the shape of the brush from square to spline. It has some small problems currently that we are aware of. Some of them already fixed for the next release, but you can call it an experimental feature for now, really.
Okay, it's nice and back. By the way, when it comes to
so also, sometimes when everything slows down, just reload the level again, because as we said, Unreal sometimes is well, not the best at cleaning up some memory, and when working with large landscapes, every bit counts basically.
I just wanted to show you that these clouds can work properly. It's just a setting in ultra dynamic sky. So we set to background so that we can see better. Okay, do we have something else to show in Errant landscape? I think we can switch to Errant biomes.
Yeah, let's start populating this map so it doesn't look so barren.
But first, slides. We can't skip that. But slides will be slightly more interesting than last time. So Errant Biomes is our plugin for placing objects procedurally on the map. It can be any type of objects, usually nature, but can be affixes and grass and gameplay elements. Errant Biomes is GPU accelerated, and it's aimed to work on huge maps. And one of the key things is that you can use a number of inputs to control your generation and placement of these assets. Here's another example of how it works. And things like hand-painted masks, landscape weight maps, textures, procedural logic, metadata, things like height and slope, volumes. And because it's programmable, it's up to you how you mix these inputs. And we have some examples here. This is just noise, a single node. This is based on the weight map, so the grass is where the green weight map is. This is texture plus procedural logic, so you can do any kind of logic, and in here we have a field made this way. Here we have a mask, hand-painted mask, so one of the systems in our tools, and we don't affect the density here, but we affect the mesh selection, so we pick the dead trees instead of the normal trees. It's worth mentioning that within masks, we have something which is called palette. So you can save a number of values within a single mask and give them some meaning. Like in here, we have a number of masks, and within these masks, we have like values in the palettes. So one value may mean place trees, another one place something else. Really, it's up to you because you create that logic. But this is pretty advanced if you need it. One other type of input is interspecies dependency. So one species reacts to another, and in this case we are spawning leaves at the bottom under the trees. The next big thing is runtime spawning. So usually you spawn large objects like trees in offline mode, meaning they behave similarly as if you placed instances, mesh instances in the level. This is optimal. But if you were to spawn grass this way, you have millions of grass objects in the level. Your level file would be huge, and loading it and managing it would be terrible. So we don't do that. Instead, we have a system that works similarly to landscape grass. So it spawns these grass instances around the camera. In here, it's an exaggerated in the video so that you can see the effect, but it's based on max draw distance and cooling. And what is important is that in landscape grass, it's all in the landscape material. So you are rather restricted in terms of what logic you can do. And in Errant biomes, you can do super complex logic and use masks and every other type of input for runtime spawned objects. So much more flexibility. And the next thing is that biomes and spawned objects can affect landscape. As you can see here, sometimes you need to tweak the landscape underneath spawned objects to hide edges, or maybe the shallowness of these meshes. So Errant biomes can do it for you. And right now we can modify the height, but later this year we will add support for painting weight maps from objects and from subbiomes. And the last thing is that Errant Biomes is integrated with PCG. So you can, for example, use Errant Biomes to manage the generation and the subbiomes, and at some point when it comes to spawning, you can switch to PCG, pass the data to PCG, so that PCG could do more advanced logic, raycasts, maybe some precise bounding box checks, so you can get the benefits of both systems. And let's go back to Unreal. Let's check if there are some questions now.
No, you can continue. Killer is asking when will be the next sale. I'm not sure. We usually do them seasonal when there's a like an occasion or something.
To be honest, we don't know when the next sale will be.
Exactly.
One day we wake up and we decide it's sale. Okay, so I entered the Errant Biomes mode. Click the initialization button and let's create a new. Okay, I want to remove that existing biome because this will make it more confusing. Okay, let's create.
Yeah, we had some leftovers from testing the stream before. Let's just remove them. Yeah, so maybe I'll go over the assets that we are creating currently. So main way we are separating responsibility in Errant Biomes is by splitting it into biomes, subbiomes, and species, where the biome is like a large area that is, for example, whole maintenance region. Subbiome will be a smaller area inside those big areas like forest, fields, and things like this. And species will be objects like groups like trees, grass, and things like this. So in the species, you have finally the assets that will be spawned, and you can spawn anything you want. Those could be meshes, other blueprints, and in blueprints you can place whatever you want. It could be decals, it could be audio sounds. So usually the biomes is the biomes, as they are the largest area, they are something that you place very fast without much procedural logic. This is something that takes a big area that you just paint quickly, and subbiomes have more of the procedural logic for placing objects. And I see Daniel waits to explain the empty subbiome. Yeah, so maybe you can continue. I'll explain that maybe.
Okay.
So subbiomes always compete with each other. So there always is one subbiome showing in the biome. So it's a good practice, especially at the start of the map, to create an empty subbiome. So you can have places where there's no procedural generation. So you can have some mask that removes everything. Usually in the end, you'll have subbiomes filling everything. But empty subbiome is very useful, especially at the
And
start.
I just realized that instead of empty, this time we will use the grasslands. So we will make the grasslands appear by default. I think that's fine. So these two subbiomes will compete, and they will compete based on that value that is in the mask they generate. And for the grasslands, we will emit some low value, like 0.1. And if the forest emits a higher value, it will win over the grasslands.
Yeah, and as you might see, those graphs are basically only material graphs. We've started with our own custom graph for creating logic, but we quickly realized that everything you really want is already in Material Editor, and artists are very familiar with it, have material functions created for it. So why create and start all over again? So that's why we are sticking with Material Editor. And it doesn't feel hacky at all. It feels like right at home.
So I'm just now adding parameters, and we'll show you one thing about managing these parameters. I just need to rename it. I guess it will now rename. Okay, that's fine. So nice beam say minus.
Yeah, so now inside the forest subbiome masks, Daniel is creating some procedural logic and also creating a material instance parameters that will be exposed inside the subbiome asset. So this logic that Diane is creating now could be something that, for example, your technical artist does, but as you can also see, it's not that complicated, anyone can do it. Just let's say as this gets advanced and more complicated, and this is something that your more advanced team members will make, and they can also just expose it just the same as it would be in the material instance of your material for the meshes, for example.
Yes, so just a few things. I'll have to explain a few things at once. So I added these parameters, and you can of course change them in the material directly. But assuming that some of your team members don't want to enter the materials, maybe they're scared of them, you can expose
and before you go on, you haven't pressed apply in the material, so yeah,
Okay.
It didn't compile yet.
And now we will check. First off, we can actually maybe spawn something before we go into details. So Errant Biomes allows you to work on a fragment of the map. You don't have to work on the entire map, and we select the region to generate. Let's see what we
and
get.
while you could just, for example, unload part of the world in word partition, sometimes having the bigger context for where you're making changes is very useful. So even while having more of the world worded in word partition, you might want to work on the smaller part just to have a generation come faster.
Yeah, so this is the pattern that we will use for spawning the forest. And if we now change the, I'll switch it to auto. If we now switch that parameter here, it changes. So as you can see, without entering the material, we are affecting the pattern. And
yeah, and as we said, it is exposed in subbiome asset, which is important as now someone doesn't need to understand. We don't have a one single giant graph that contains all the logic for everything in the whole world. We split it into smaller graphs that can be understood by any team member.
Yes, and now we need to add some species because we just have empty subbiomes. So let's go to a subbiome, to grasslands, and let's add some grass. And we have some templates. You can create your own templates as well. And we'll use the template for grass. And we can actually generate it. Oh no, let's set up the forest as well, because forest might actually win over that area. Okay. So when the subbiome is called forest, the species is trees.
I mean, that is a rule that you can certainly break. We are not limiting what names you use.
I just mean that in terms of what these things mean.
Yeah. So subbiome or biome will contain species, and like the trees is a kind of a species. Like so, you have trees inside the species called trees. I got lost with that logic.
Yes, so now I click generate, and that region got filled with content. As you can see, mostly grasslands, but where that pattern has the values higher than 0.1, we get trees. So that's how these subbiomes compete. And of course, this is procedural. Okay, we can also see runtime spawning in action. As you can see the grass here, and we can fly around and it generates at the horizon. Okay, and let's switch some meshes because these are just placeholders. And of course, this is procedural generation, so that takes just a few seconds. We have a Mavi pack in here, so let's use it.
Yeah, another plugin shout out. So first was Ultra Dynamic Skies, now Maui packs. I mean, like half the industry is basically importing Maui packs in the as a starting point.
Let's use this one. And of course, it doesn't have to be a single mesh. You can use more meshes. We will do it. And you can control their probability. Let's use a medium one, maybe. So the probability here of each mesh. And we have a spacing, so distance between the instances set to 150 centimeters right now.
Yeah, and important thing about the spacing setting is it is a bit different than, for example, density in landscape grass. This spacing will be conserved between the assets. There will be never any tree that is closer than 150 centimeters next to each other. So you'll never have trees just randomly spawning on top of each other. This spacing will be there always.
For you.
Yes.
I will try to switch the grass to something nicer. Let's see if I succeed. Okay. So as you can see, it's not super difficult. We could just keep adding more sub-biomes and species and so on. And at some point, it really starts looking good. But let's play with inputs, I guess.
Yeah, let's put those trees on our needles weight map.
So right now it's completely controlled by noise. This is of course pretty basic, so let's change it. Is that the trees? I have too many open, but I think so. And here's the growth mask. So this is the one that controls the placement of the species. You have a similar mask for sub-biomes that we were changing before. So instead of noise, let's sample the weight map. So you have this biomes category, and you have a number of different sample nodes for each occasion. And this one we'll use for weight map, and we will use the name forest needles. So the same, you need to use the name as in the weight map. Let's apply it. Let's regenerate.
Yeah, and also go quickly to answer the question. Pavel is asking if both species have. He probably didn't set click apply.
No, I need a sub-biome. The sub-biome is has its own noise.
Pavel is asking what if you have two assets with probability of 1. This is basically it means that they both have the same probability. So if they both have a probability of 1, they have same probability of spawning. If one of the species assets has probability of 0.5, it's half as likely to spawn as the other species that have probability of 1. And yeah, for sure, we need to place more bugs, trash, and so on to make it a real forest experience.
So right now, our sub-biome was limiting where the trees are placed, but now I made the sub-biome to just want to spawn everywhere. And so the species now decides, controls or affects the most the placement. As you can see, we get these patterns from the weight map. So the trees follow the yellow weight map.
Yeah, maybe not the most realistic pattern, but looks very satisfying.
Yes. So this is weight maps.
Yeah, I think maybe you should have put it in the sub-biome.
That's true. We can do
the
it.
weight map reading. As we made it forest sub-biome, and then we put the logic
Let's
inside
not abandon our...
Yeah, exactly.
Our sub-biome. So...
Yeah, let's be consistent with each other.
Okay. The important part here is that when you have a forest sub-biome, you of course have multiple species normally within that sub-biome. So in here you will have smaller trees and bushes and grass and all of that. And this is what the sub-biome will restrict their placement. But then they will have their own logic on top of that to decide where they want to be spawned.
This is very dense forest. I think we won't be able to place anything in there.
Yeah, let's increase the spacing, maybe 200.
Kiwi Hawk is asking, how do we mask for a village that might be in the forest? That depends on how are you placing your village, because there are many ways to mask that village. You could just do it manually. You could paint a manual biome mask. You could also have it, for example, removed by a biome mask from Errant landscape. You have a brush that edits landscape anyway there. You could also use, for example, bounce input into the sub-biome mask. So you can input just bounce of the actor, like Daniel is showing now, Biomes bounce texture, that you can set it just to single actor or single actor class, for example. So you have, for example, your houses have a class of BP house, right? So you can just select that in the bounds of all the BP houses, you don't want to spawn your trees, basically. Maybe if you have some time when we go over the inputs, we'll show that.
I will now show you how to remove something with a hand-painted mask. So in the grassland sub-biome, I added we are sampling a mask, hand-painted mask, which we will name empty. Then we multiply it, so because wherever the mask is painted, we really want that value to be high. And we will do a max node so that in the remaining region we get that 0.1.
Yeah, Victor Art is asking, so on this map it makes most sense to use one biome. Well, as I said, the biome is something big that covers a large area. It can be that your level basically has only one biome and just sub-biomes inside it. So sometimes it will be like this. If you have, for example, game that goes from desert to mountains to beach, you would probably split it into multiple biomes.
Yeah, you put things into separate biomes if they have very little in common, pretty much. And we can show that tool in a moment. So
continue.
I entered the mask mode. I will create that new mask and I will call it empty because that's what I used in the material. And let's tweak the radius a bit. So we are now painting the removal mask. Let's regenerate. Yes, and we are not like fully removing it. We set the grasslands in that place. So the grass will still spawn. We could be placing an empty sub-biome, so like completely empty. Let's say underneath a house. You don't want the grass blades to go through the floor. Yes, and this gives you a lot of control because you can do like exact shapes and so on.
Yeah, we are focusing a lot on editing everything through masks, so they are easy to visualize and organize your work. In the upcoming updates, we did quite a lot to organizing those masks. We added possibility of having them into folders, so you have hierarchies showing. Instead of using names, we use assets, so you never have a problem when you rename the mask. You'll just rename the assets, so all the other references work properly. So there's a lot of nice things coming with that. So while you can, with other tools, usually work with volumes, you can still work with volumes basically with bounds inside the biomes, but we usually prefer working with masks.
One other thing I wanted to show is that, okay, biomes first, because there was a question about biomes. So as you can see, the entire area is orange right now, and that's because our first biome has the orange color. We could change it maybe to represent much the name better. So let's switch it to green. So this is green. And if you wanted a new one, we add the new biome here. We could call it, let's say, Arctic. I will do it just for the Arctic. We can give it, let's say, oh, that's a nice color for the Arctic.
Perfect. It was made to be Arctic.
Yes, so you go to in here and you start painting it. And that usually that one you will do with large brushes. So you have your huge map and, part of it is Arctic.
Yeah, we've seen some people getting a bit confused about this, and for example, painting all the like using biomes as a sub-biomes and having like small hand-painted elements as biomes. Nothing is against that really. You can do this, but more of a thought was that biome is just something very big, and for the like smaller chances, you use sub-biomes and lodging inside the species. Because also sub-biomes allow you to have more control over everything. If you use sub-biomes instead, you can use those materials to add procedural logic. And as for biomes, we meant them for such large areas that you won't need to modify them with textures, for example, or any procedural logic.
Okay, the next thing I wanted to show is that we can affect other things, not just the growth. So not just the density of objects. So if we go to grass and we go to transform, we have the scale here. And of course we could apply random scale, but this will change from instance to instance. So it wouldn't look supernatural in some cases, but we have this material here. And if we, let's say, do some noise here, let's copy the noise from somewhere else, then this will apply like the gradual scaling over that area. Let's do like 0.25 maybe.
Yeah, and maybe don't go to 0 as a minimum because that's strong. But also this shows a bit what we are talking about, how we split generation in smaller like graphs that can be used by individual team members instead of having that one graph that only single person is allowed to use in the whole team because it's so complicated and it's so easy to break. We really want for artists to be able to just go, okay, can I add another species inside there and just be able to do this without any great approval from above, because they can work in their smaller species context without needing to understand everything around them. So Łukasz is asking, can we affect the masks in runtime? No, everything is generated offline. Even the runtime spawning isn't calculating anything except just transfers for spawning. So no, you cannot edit the masks in runtime. That has some advantages. For example, you can have very complicated logic even for your runtime species, and you don't pay any cost for them during the gameplay.
I'm playing with the scale. The grass doesn't show it well because it's too like mono. Like the color is pretty much the same everywhere.
Yeah, maybe just put it on trees. Just copy it there. It looks very nice on trees if you just go with random noise under scaling.
Okay, I will bring the window back. Also, that's one note. If you want to just change the scale, we don't have this property here, but you can always enter the mask and simply change that value. This will affect the scale, overall scale. And of course,
yeah, Kiwi Hawk is asking if those paint masks can be modified by height and slope. So you can do it in the material. You can multiply it, for example, by some slope mask called height mask. Maybe we'll show that when we go to like showcase maps where we have that set up already. Yeah, and now we have nice noise on the scaling of trees.
Yeah, since it's gradual, maybe we don't see it that well because of the grasslands. We could actually disable grasslands for a moment, but yeah, this is...
I think it's visible.
Yeah, this is changing like in waves, not like each tree having different size. Of course, you can have that as well. And when it comes to metadata, actually, maybe that's a good moment to switch to that different map that comes with the plugin. I will just save it. Okay, something is taking my shortcut for saving.
It's not replay. It's very really wants to show that scaling of the trees. Wants to replay that moment.
Yeah, so in the plugins content for the biomes, you have this map called inputs. Well, let's go to this map. And if you don't see anything when loading this map, just load it in world partition in here. And here you have a few examples of different types of inputs. So fully procedural, metadata, so based on slope, where we have slopes.
And by procedural, Daniel he meant like just a noise,
yes,
for example.
Yes, yeah. Like no data input. Weight map, so based on the green weight map here. This is texture. Well, we pick the checkerboard texture.
Of course, the most natural ways for trees to grow.
Yes, and I can show you how that looks, because if you enter biomes in that map, we can, let's say, enter the texture example. Each of them are separate biomes, but this is just for the showcase case. Yeah, you can see here like each of them are separate biomes just for the test. And if we go, I close the window, I think. Okay, let's go to texture and to the growth mask. So this is what we do. We sample the texture. Like you can do all of that without using any nodes that we provide. We do use a node that we provide, but this is a helper that helps you recalculate bounds so that you can calculate UVs for your texture. But overall, you can do any logic you want, and it's one of the examples.
Yeah, advantages of using the material editor. You get such things very easily, and you already know how to do it. We don't need to explain how to sample textures. You already know how to do it.
Yeah, this one is an example of where we add the species with a mask. So as you can see, where the mask is painted, we get the trees, except I think I played with that with a different mask in here. But yes, in general, if we now switch auto generation and we paint a bit, let's just wait a second.
Yeah, because we have a full map selected, we need to generate it once. But now it will only update the regions.
Yes, and if I now paint, we get new trees here. And so this is we don't get it here because we're out of the biome area. But this is an example of using the mask to add objects. And here is an example of using a mask to remove objects. So where we painted, they get removed. And really the complexity here is super low. If we go to mask example.
Kiwi Hawk is saying that this is the strange shape of a lake. I don't know what he's talking about. All the lakes in our area look like this. Like this big strange thing on top of a mountain.
Oh, this is a nice example because it uses two masks. So it uses one mask for adding foliage. We do use a saturate node, which clamps the value to the range of 0 and 1, which is useful when you're not sure that your users will actually paint reasonable values in the masks. And then we subtract the other mask, which is remove foliage. So such a simple logic gives you a lot of control.
I'll say that reasonably is up to you. As you can use any values you want in masks, we don't limit to 0 to 1 values. They are 16-bit floats, so whatever you fit in that range you can use. So sometimes it is maybe worth using, for example, 0 to 1 range to represent one thing and 1 to 2 range represents something else. Maybe it's easier to think than going from 0 to half and half to 1. It depends on you. Our visualization currently has problems with showing those super high values. If you decide to go, 100 value for representing something, it will be hard to see in the viewport currently, but we'll work on that. We'll give you some way to specify ranges that you want to preview. And KiwiHawk, he's also asking if you can blur and feather the edges of these masks. Currently, you can do it in the material, but we should also add some tools for brushes themselves. We don't have that
So
yet.
You have this, I think there was hardness, but it isn't perfect. I think we should add more control, more like softness.
Oh, yeah.
So as you can see, this isn't hard. What?
Yeah, just use also smaller maybe value than 1. It will be more visible, so you can.
You mean for the foreground?
Yeah.
Yes, and of course you can, let's say, select meshes based on that. So smaller trees maybe on the outskirts of your forest and so on. Yes, normally we probably should add some tools for blurring it in the material. Auto blurring is slightly expensive because it needs to take multiple samples. And this is one other example of using the metadata. In this case, it's height. So
yeah, this is the one that Kiwihawk was waiting for, so you can show him the slope and height, and we saved it for last, just so you can, just to keep him on the stream.
yes, and well, I don't know if we need to go into details on this one, but
Yeah, just go quickly.
yeah, I'll show the metadata 2 example.
That's the thing he was waiting for, and you'll just skip it. Come on, Daniel. Don't be so cruel.
I didn't know it's that interesting. So we have this height mask here. So this will, like as the tooltip is saying, this will output. Oh, it's a different tooltip. Sorry. Smooth mask from height between given min max values. Okay, because we have two, I think, two nodes for that. One is height, and the other one is height mask.
Yeah, the height just gives you the height, basically the value of the landscape at the pixel of this mask.
Okay, yeah. So this will be like black, output 0. Once it reaches min height, it will start outputting something larger than 0, and it just will reach 1 at max height. So right now we have these two values, and it interpolates between them. And if we set these values to almost the same or exactly the same value, we will get a sharper transition. Let's see.
I think you have whole map selected, or not?
Yes, I do, but okay. So as you can see, this is a very sharp transition. And if we give it something larger, like we had before, it will be softer. I think I removed one. Too many zeros. And just for performance, we can select just that region. Okay. Yeah, so as you can see, that's how it works. And if you wanted to clamp it from both sides, you can use that nodes, two of these nodes together multiplied, as we showed recently on Discord.
Yeah, if you have an example for that, you can show the slope node maybe as well. But I don't know.
Yes, there is this example here with slope. We can open it.
Yeah, Kiwi. That's exactly what you can use for masking, for example, things inside the water. If your water is always, for example, below 0, you could use that to mask out the trees or a whole sub-biome, for example. Yeah, a good way to organize that would be to have, for example, a sub-biome for underwater that just means with other sub-biomes when it's area in the water.
Okay, let's see what we get. Okay, so now I set it to 0.15 and 0.3. And so this node will output 0 until we reach that angle. Unfortunately, this is not degrees because inside of it we have a dot product. So, you know.
Yeah, we'll provide later a node that it has mean and max slopes specified in degrees, because it can really make your brain hurt when you start thinking about this. But on the other hand, usually the degrees is not. Usually, you should just look at the results and not just the value till it looks correctly, because it's hard even to say what the angle of that mountain is. So just maybe Daniel showed debug, and it will be more obvious what we are doing there.
Oh, sorry, the debug, yeah.
Yeah, and Victor Art is saying that we said smaller trees at weaker masks, for example, but can we choose another tree mesh? And yes, we have another mask that is called asset group mask, and that just allows you to select a different group of assets inside the species. So you can spawn, for example, dead trees inside some area. Daniel had some small video in the background of the slides that maybe you remember when he was painting a mask and the trees were changing. But yeah.
I will show that in a moment. I just wanted to debug the metadata, but I think I'm doing it wrong. The metadata, this is sub-biome, I think, and we want species, right? I'm not sure. No, species. Metadata 1. Oh. Okay, so that's how it looks. And if we now tweak the values, so you need to do arcus cosinus right now to get it. So like arcus cosinus for 30 degrees, I think is 0.15 or something like that. Or arc cosine in English, is that?
Yes.
Okay, didn't apply.
You didn't press apply.
Didn't apply. Yeah, so there you got this gradual change. And if we do like almost almost the same values, the transition will be pretty hard. We don't have such.
Yeah, and I'll say that this is basically the process that you should usually use. Just enable the debug of the masks you're working on and just play with values and look what they do. It's easier than trying to understand everything in your head correctly. And just looking at the spawned meshes, it's easier usually to look at the mask first, and the meshes will follow.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, then you can go.
Did we consider allowing different scale spacing and asset groups within one species? Yes, we want to add basically. Currently, you have asset groups inside the species where you select where you select just a group of assets. But we want to have something like a group of species to be selected. We want basically species to be as easy to create as possible, which is currently you need to click quite a lot to add those assets. Not very much, like 3 clicks to add the asset, but we really want to creating species to be super fast, and then for you to be able to just have organize many species quite easily. But we'll also add some more options for modifying the assets, so you'll be able to set transforms per each asset as well, not only per whole species.
But maybe I'll show how the current group mask works. So similarly to the growth mask and the scale mask, we also have the asset group mask. And in here you can output some value, and this value decides which mesh we pick for spawning. And in here you see you have asset groups, so the meshes that we have all the meshes in the first group right now, group 0, but you can create a number of these groups. And then let's say you have 10 groups. First one is small trees, then the middle and the large ones. And then in your group mask, you can output, let's say, low value. This will spawn smaller trees from the smaller, like the group 0. Or you can output higher value. This will pick the last group and spawn large trees. So pretty much these groups, like the 0 picks the 0 group, the 0.5 picks like the middle group, and you can have like 20 of them. It's I don't know how to call that.
Yeah, let's at least maybe show 2. Let's add a second group and just show that.
Okay, I will add a second group with something like maybe boxes or something very visible.
Yeah, just so we know. Maybe we have some dead trees. I don't know.
Okay, we can try. But it's probably not called... Oh, actually, yeah. We do have.
Oh, we have those are ours trees. That's perfect.
That's okay.
And for now, maybe let's just show what happens first, and then let's change the value of the group mask to 1, and then show the noise.
Okay, so the current value is 0. And
yeah, so it will choose the lowest group currently. We have 2 groups, so it will choose the group
nothing
number.
Will happen, right?
Yeah. Currently we'll see no changes. And now let's input 1 into that group.
Apply.
You need to apply. Yeah. Yeah, that is easy thing to miss.
And as you can see,
now
all the trees are now dead.
No, Daniel, you've killed the trees. Oh no. Now let's make some of them alive. Maybe put some noise quickly there just to show, that you can choose that dynamically in that.
Okay, I just need to find
mask.
the noise.
And I think that would be
so that I can copy it from somewhere. Yeah. Okay, apply. Okay, and now we have some dead trees like in here. And of course there are different scales, so it looks a bit weird, but and of course again, if you go to debug mode, if you go to the forest, you can then debug each of these types of masks. So in this case it will be the group, and you need to generate to see it. But I think we're not debugging the.
Yeah, no, you see it already. I think you need.
This
Oh no,
looks
you're
too
looking
pretty, I think. So maybe it's a different. I will check. Maybe it's a different species than. I wanted to debug trees. Sorry, not the group. Yeah. So this is. Am I correct? This is group. Okay. This might be not as intuitive because there is this threshold of 0.5, and above this threshold we get dead trees, and below that threshold we get normal trees. We could.
Yeah, and as Kiwi is saying that you could even limit this by height. So for example, you could say that above some height, the other group will be chosen, and you'll just use those objects. But also remember, you could also do it with separate species. You could have just one species grow above some height and not the other. It's always a choice if you want to use groups or just separate species, as species will give you more options. Groups will need to have the same. Groups will share the growth mask and they will share the spacing, for example. And if you want to change that, you need to create a separate species. That's why I'm saying that we want to make creating species as easy as possible, so you don't need to use group masks as often. I would want to move us as far as mostly into creating as many species, and just create maybe some simpler UI when you see only like most important settings, and have some ways for organizing that better.
Okay, one thing we didn't show is priorities, but just before we do it, I wanted to show something else, something very basic. So right now we get grass in the grasslands, but we don't get any grass in the forest, because in the forest subbiome we don't have that species. So, but we can go to the our biome and to the forest, and we can add that species here. So let's do it. Let's add grass. And let's regenerate. And now we get grass in the forest as well.
That's very dense grass.
Yeah, I just wanted to show you that the species has, some of its own like preference and existence, and then you can pick them in different subbiomes and so on. And that's how you compose your biomes. Okay, the priorities. I guess that's important.
Yeah, so Victor was also asking, but it's not just above or below 0.5. With group mask, when you have only two masks, the below 0.5 will be a first mask and above 0.5 will be the second mask. But that depends on how many masks you have, because the range is normalized to 0 or from 0 to 1. So if you have 3 masks, it will be first mask from 0 to 0.333, then second one from 0.33 to 0.66. It's easier to explain if you see the pictures on the documentation page, really.
I could do it in Paint, but I will spare you my painting. Okay, I'm now adding another species to our forest, which is rocks. And rocks have a high priority by default. Of course, you can change it. So you have this in the species, you have this priority. This is pretty high. And priority radius, meaning within that radius, the rocks if they have higher priority, then they remove other species. Let's see how that looks.
Yeah, this is also part of us doing something that you in other packages you sometimes need to do yourself in one giant graph. Have specified that those trees remove those trees and so on. We want to make it as easy as possible for you to do it from a single species without necessarily editing some giant graphs. So you have this easy priority way of removing other species in some distance. So the species with higher priority will remove species with lower priority in their set priority radius. So if you have a set priority radius of 2 meters around the rocks, they will remove anything that has lower priority where they spawn.
Yep, I'm just fixing because we had the sampling of the weight mapping, both the species and the subbiome. And now, just for the test, I will make the trees spawn everywhere. And so we just get the rocks that remove them. If not for the rocks, everything would be covered by trees. And as you can see, where the rocks spawn, we get empty space.
That is also true in nature. If not for the rocks, the trees will be everywhere.
And if not for the humans.
If not for those rocks.
Yeah, so as you can see, it's super simple. It can't be any simpler, I guess. You just decide on the priorities in your species and the radius. We can change the radius just for a test. We can I don't know, increase it to 800. Yes, and then the rocks. Well, actually, they right now they even remove grass. That looks quite funny. Okay, and we have 2 subjects left. One is landscape adjustment. Let's try it. So in the trees, if you go to these meshes, you have this align strategy. Oh, but before we do that, is it configured properly, the biomes?
No, we didn't set up the landscape for biomes adjustments.
Yeah, so in biomes, this is hidden when you open the panel, but you have this biomes landscape layer. So we need to pick one layer, and currently we don't have a good layer for that. So maybe we should add one.
Yeah, your biomes layer should be at the top usually, as it needs to do only, small final changes. Yeah, as you enter the landscape mode, the standard Epic's landscape decided to update a whole landscape, as it always updates the whole landscape when you go in. So you have to wait a moment. I think it's done.
Oh, sorry, I was reading the questions or the chat.
No, and you were reading for too long and autosave came.
That's okay. That's okay. Okay, so we name it Errant Biomes. We lock it because we don't want to accidentally start painting on it, and then realize 2 days later that everything is lost. If you don't use source control, don't do it. And now in Errant Biomes, we set the same name. So use Errant Biomes will only affect that layer, Errant Biomes. And now we have this align strategy in the mesh. And we can set it to, let's say, align to circle. And we have some properties such as radius. We can do 200.
Yeah, but also currently you're setting it only for a single type of tree. Is that what you wanted? You can also set it in for the whole group because we have 2 trees.
Yeah, that's true. Let's do it for the group. So lower here. And also note that the landscape has the precision of 1 meter. So you can't, you don't have like a infinite precision here, but it's...
Yeah, and the default settings are pretty bad. As the radius is only of 1 meter, usually that won't look
Yes, and we can apply some offset to showcase how that works. Maybe, I don't know, 1 meter.
Yeah, you could think of it as roots of the trees, for example, that modifying the landscape underneath them a bit.
Yep, if we now go in here, you can see, I don't know if you could see it, maybe I should increase the value even more, but you can see these
I think
bumps.
you have a few trees next to each other, so it looks like a one big bump, but you can clearly see that the landscape is now going in the middle of those trees.
I can hide
adjusting.
The meshes for a moment. What? No? The grass? The grass is different category, I think. Translucency?
No, I think it just splits them. No, static meshes should work as hiding. I don't know why
interesting.
It work. Maybe because it splits them. I wanted to say maybe because it splits them into instant static meshes, but the rocks are hiding, so I have no idea. And he was asking if we are making our own landscape materials, and the landscape we have here currently is available for you to download from your license page. This is just a simple, quick material that we made as a starting point, but you can use any material you want.
Yeah, I made the grass smaller so that we could see better, and we can increase the alignment a bit more. Of course, normally you don't increase it above your mesh. We do it just for the presentation, but you try to match the landscape height to your mesh. Oh, you could see it now. It's raised right now for each of these trees.
Yeah.
Let me see what we have. Okay, the instanceable blueprints. Maybe that could be the last thing we show, because I think we are good on time.
Oh, glad we can do this.
Okay, so in here we are placing individual meshes. We could be placing entire blueprints. The thing is, we don't want to place blueprints as a blueprint actor, because that will be very heavy. But I will let Adam explain it, and I will just go through clicking.
Yeah, it depends on what you want. Of course, sometimes you have actors that have some logic and you want to place them as just a single actor. But often you want to use blueprints just as a way to make a prefab, basically just organize meshes next to each other in some relation, right? So you want to have rocks in certain formation, but you don't want to create a static mesh that has all those rocks together, because it would be better for memory if you just use the same rock. So you can just...
I just realized that I think we have a class for that as well.
Yes. You don't need to use it, but start with it. It's easier because you don't have to implement the interface.
Oh yeah, that's like this one, I guess.
Biomes instanceable blueprint. So you create a blueprint that inherits the Biomes instanceable blueprint class, and inside it, all the meshes that you put inside, so all the static mesh components, but also all the instance static mesh components, will be later extracted out of the blueprint and placed as individual instances into the level. So they are just as efficient as just placing everything static meshes from Errant landscape, from Errant biomes, but this allows you some control over how they will be placed in relations to each other.
I also wanted to show that this is the interfaces, and the only difference that this class makes is that it adds this interface by default, but you can add it to an existing blueprint as well.
Yeah, I think there is some problem with that currently because we expanded the interface. We added those two functions just so you can have more control. So if you're not advanced blueprint user, just use this class. And wait a second, I'll read the questions. You can read species growth in subbiome, but you cannot read subbiome in species yet. That's the limitation, but that will be soon changed.
Okay, where are we?
And yes, you can use any material you want, so Magic Map M4 will work as well. And Pavel Kania is asking if those blueprints will be interactable, for example, for cutting trees. No, they are specifically not placed as blueprints at all. So the Biomes installable blueprints is basically just a way for you to assemble how they are in relation to each other and set up the parameters that we'll have on the level. So the settings that you have in the static mesh component will be settings used on the level on the instances placed. So they won't be blueprints at all when they are placed. So you cannot have any logic inside.
And there is good reason for that, of course.
Yes, the reason for that is for performance. If the whole point of Biomes installable blueprints is that now if you then select one of them, for example, you'll see that this is not just a single actor placed on the level, they are all connected into a single group of instances. So they draw together very efficiently as they are drawn basically as one draw call, as they use the same material, same meshes, they are just offset in the world.
Yeah, so in general, even if you could place blueprints all over the level, and you can, that would kill performance and memory. You don't want to do that. So instead, the good way to do it is to spawn these instances and have another system that might one day provide that will, when your player wants to interact with that instance, hides this instance and removes it from the HISM component, places the blueprint instead, and then you interact with the blueprint. And once the interaction is over, you bring back the instance again.
Yeah, and Pavel Kania is saying that so it works similarly to packed level blueprints in short. Yes, it works similarly. Just the difference is also that packed level blueprint has instances only inside that one packed level. It doesn't share instances with other packed level blueprints. We already connect like if you selected all your packed level blueprints and created another packed level blueprint from all of them, that is basically what you get from installable blueprints. So it's even more efficient than that, but it does work similarly to that. It is the same kind of optimization, I guess. We also want to allow you to place packed level blueprints as well. KiwiHawk is asking, would assemblies be a better option for special features? I'm not sure what do you mean by assemblies. I know that's how they called it in PCG for their basically the same version of that. It is the same system. Instead of using blueprints, they are using level instances. I think we'll just allow that as well because that's a good idea. Level instances are also very easy to edit on the level. So it is basically the same idea. It is the same.
And just one last thing. When we show our assets...
I'll also say that we were first.
When we show our assets, we're talking about at the very beginning granularity of assets so that multiple team members can work. And this is what you see here. You have the biome, then you have sub-biomes. Within a sub-biome, you have species, so that if you want to adjust just the grass or just the rocks, you don't block other team members from working. And then if you want to adjust some type of the mask, you can still freely do it. That's what we call granularity. And there is, of course, a balance. You don't want too many assets, but you also want enough. That was our goal here. And I think that's all the things we wanted to cover today. Of course, we'll come with more live streams really soon, and we will be going more in-depth into various issues and problems and things the questions you ask, like maybe how to create the stumps in Gaia. Soon we'll start showing puffs as well. So I think this will be pretty important because this will be the first occasion for us to properly show the new plugin.
Yeah, maybe we'll just, we'll see, maybe we'll create some surveys so you on the Discord that you can fill out to tell us what you want to see next. Yeah, I think that went pretty well. We went over everything we really wanted to. So if you guys have have questions, you can ask them. Victor Art is asking, how is our game going? Now we are mostly focusing on tools for a moment. But except that, the game was doing pretty well, I would say.
Yeah, we will soon resume working on the game. We're excited for it. But first, we need to finish our business with Errant Puffs.
Yeah.
And Errant Puffs was difficult plugin to make, like surprisingly large. If you have more questions, you can just let us know that you have more questions. If not, we'll end the stream.
Yeah, maybe the next environment won't be a forest. Maybe it will be an island. We'll see. We certainly need to start showing less forests.
It will be a tropical island, I can already tell you.
Yeah.
Of course, also will come with new tutorials. We'll work on shorter tutorials because making large ones takes forever. So aside from live streams, you will also get tutorials.
Killer Hacking asking, what about foliage interaction to chance and instance to the blueprint? That was what Daniel was saying, that we might do it, create such systems ourselves, but Unreal has some tools for creating it in your game. There is lightweight instances, I think they call it, that you can try to use it, as we allow you to change the base class of an actor and component for instances. You can do it yourself, but as this is quite a common request, we'll probably create a ready solution for that for you as well, that will allow you to change instances into blueprints.
Yeah, this is slightly game, related to the game you're making, how you implement that system. So even if we implement it, it will work for some people, but probably not for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. That is very game specific, but we would just add you some, a bit of a framework for working with that. Yeah, what about the large landscape, like size of the Poland, for example, for simulator? It depends what kind of a simulator, because if you're making a flight simulator, you don't need to have such, for example, detail in the landscape. You can, we've had some people on Discord showing flight simulator created with Errant landscape, where they just scaled the landscape a lot, so they had huge landscape. I don't remember. It was like 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers.
10,000
and
kilometers.
It was fine. Yeah, because when you're flying very fast, you don't need to have such detail in the landscape. When you're making a train simulator, it will be a bit different, of course. There will be different problems that you have to solve. With word partition and Errant landscape, you can really go as big as you want, because you can just unload parts of the world, so you never feel so when it's getting slower, you just unload part of the level work of the smaller part of the whole, but you won't be able to load the whole map the size of the Poland and work on it at the same time. That will never happen, really.
Once we add runtime generation, maybe you could do some crazy things, such as storing, the brushes in your map, but only like spawning them as you travel through the map, building them up as you go. Many things will.
Yeah, that is also the thing. If you save all that data for the map of that level, it will be gigabytes and gigabytes of memory. So it is pretty hard. Would we use word partition for 4 kilometers by 4 kilometers map? Yes, I would use it for almost any size of the map, except like the smallest ones. I guess if it was like a kilometer by kilometer, I probably wouldn't. 2 by 2, maybe. 4 by 4, certainly, I would say. The next tutorial stream will be, I don't know, we'll see. We'll see.
So the cadence that we will try to go for will be probably 2-3 weeks between the streams. We actually have an Unreal stream, I think, on the 10th of August. So this will probably make us busy until then. And then after that, we will follow with more streams.
Yeah, we'll be trying to make more of those. For example, maybe some pre-release streams. So when the new version of the plugin will be coming out, we'll maybe make some other streams showing off the new features and things like this. And of course, we'll be making more tutorials and writing documentation for everything along with those streams. This is not a replacement for all of that. I think this looks beautiful, surprisingly. Those big white squares in the sun. Like I could see a game like this.
The global
really.
illumination as well looks great.
Yeah. Look at this grass bouncing into the undersides of those boxes. Beautiful. Such a Lumen presentation. They should have asked us to create test levels for them. Screw the valley and canyon. Really, that's the thing. That's what you want to show.
Yes. So yeah, we promise we'll make quite many streams from now on, and we will go in depth really. And yeah, we're also excited to go in depth because, you know, as you can imagine, we went over the basics like about 1 million times before. So this will be interesting.
Yeah. So thank you guys. It was nice having you all. It was nice having that many of you as well, because we thought that maybe it will be like 2 people. Having over 10 people, it was like, wow, that's a crowd. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys, and see you in the next stream.
Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.